In this video, I'm going to show you how to transform some old pots into decoupage or works of art. The first thing I'm going to do is to paint them with white chalk paint and then use some fancy napkins for my decoupage. And before we get on with the video, if you don't know me, I'm Julie from Julie Davis Flower Workshops and Flower Start, the online flower arranging classes. I've got a really great Facebook group, so if you do like this video, don't forget to give it a like, but also hop along to my Facebook group. Again, I'll leave the details in the show notes underneath my video.
For this project, I'm going to be using this cream coloured metal planter. I've given it a wash and I've also scraped off the price ticket. As you can see, I've turned my container upside down and I'm going to paint the bottom first, and then when that's dry I'll turn it the right way up and paint the top section. I'm using chalk paint, and this is probably the first time I've ever used it, and I've read lots about it and seen lots about it on YouTube, and it seems to be a bit of a miracle paint, no preparation required and probably only one coat. You'll have to see how I got on. I'm not quite sure that chalk paint will be my go-to paint from now on, but let's see how it works out. The one good thing about it is it does seem to dry really fast, so by the time I've finished painting the bottom, I'm ready to start at the top. This is what my pot looks like after one coat of paint, and you can see that it's still quite streaky, so I'm going in here with my second coat of paint. After this coat of paint dried, I still wasn't very impressed by the coverage. It still looked very streaky. So what I decided to do was to use some chalk paint in a spray can and see how I got on with that. The coverage was really great, and if you do decide to use a spray paint, just make sure you're outside in a well ventilated area. If you'd like to know what I was going to do with the other containers stacked up and ready to go, let me know in the comments and I'll make a video of that another time. This isn't going too well so far. The chalk paint plus the spray paint has resulted in lots of crackling. Once my paint was dry, I ended up using a dry muslin cloth and using a sort of sanding effect, just flicking off all the bits of paint that were loose, and then I covered it up with a clear coat sealer and did one final coat of the chalk spray paint. Now my prep's complete, I'm all ready to get on with my decoupage. I've run out of specialist decoupage glue which came in this green pot, so what I'm going to do is to take some regular PVA glue and water it down a little bit with some water in my jug, and then from there I need a paintbrush. I've got a children's paintbrush here to apply the glue, and a pair of scissors. Now they're not to cut around the shapes of my roses, they're actually there to open up my packet of napkins. I'm going to tear my papers to give a lovely natural edge to them. My napkins have 2 roses in full bloom and then a smaller pair of roses on the other corners. So what I'm going to do is just, well, not cut around the edges, I'm going to rip around the edges and then place them around the edge of my pot in a really pleasing fashion. Now the napkins I've bought are 3-ply napkins, so you can see me here ripping the bottom layer off, and then I do find it slightly harder to pull apart the other 2 layers, which are bonded around the edges. So I did subsequently learn that it's much easier if you just dampen your fingers and apply pressure, pinch the napkin between your fingers, the 2 sections of the ply that are left will lift apart a little bit. Because I was having difficulty separating out the napkins, what I decided to do was start tearing around my roses in the hope that that jagged raw edge would enable me to peel them apart and separate them. And another tip for you, it's much easier, rather than ripping your motifs out, if you take a thin paintbrush, an artist paintbrush, dip it in water and then draw around the edge of the shape you want to use, you'll find it much easier to then almost pull the pieces apart. It's like the tissue paper, the decoupage paper, just sort of melts away. Success at last, I can finally pull away that back sheet of the napkin, revealing my lightweight diaphanous piece of decoupage paper with a perfect rose. I then placed my container onto a piece of muslin just to hold it steady because it is rounded. It was rocking all over the place and making clonking sounds as I worked. So the first thing I need to do, because I know I'm running out of the proper decoupage glue, is to water some of my PVA down just to get it to a nice sort of loose consistency rather than really, really runny.
So I'm going to take my glue and glue a patch on here and then lift up my rose and stick it in place. So gluing quite a wide area, and if I'm lucky, using my paintbrush, I can just, oh, sometimes that works. It didn't work today. Pick it up. And then from the middle, brushing outwards. So there's a few grooves on the can here. So making sure I'm working along the grooves. And I guess if I get a ruckle or a bubble, it doesn't really matter because that's a sort of the aged look. The sort of almost what I would think as being old-fashioned look I'm going to create. So number one done. Think about our next rose. So this is a slightly more open rose down here. Just going to wipe up those bits of glue so I don't get them onto my good piece. And then do the same thing. So I might here try and include the stem. Just make it a little more natural. There we go again. I'm wondering whether, because it is so thin, whether I could just paint on the top of it instead of doing that glue underneath. Should we give that a go? So here I've got my stem here. It's a little bit, I think that will go because I've overlapped it there and it seemed to have adhered just while I was placing it. So let's have a go with that, and then I won't have to worry about picking it up and putting it in the right place. I can just paint my glue over the top. So here goes. Oh, it's a very cheap children's paintbrush. It's got bristles coming out of it. So I'm going to start from the middle and paste outwards. That seems to have worked.
I then cut round or ripped around the leaves and added them in underneath the first rose just to cover up that white gap a little bit and make it look as if the roses were naturally growing on the outside of the container rather than just being randomly placed. Once I was happy with my technique and getting a bit more confident, I then decided to take the roses out to both sides and then finally across the back of the container. I was really pleased with the way it turned out, but several days later I decided to add even more decorative details using some of my Iron Orchid design stamps, so watch on to the end of the video and I'll show you exactly what I did. This is probably a good point in the video to let you know that I'm filming this decoupage project as part of the Sunday Funday challenge, which is hosted by Yanni and Diane at Decorative and the Crafting Cousins. I'll leave a link to their channels in the show notes underneath this video and also let you have details of the playlist so you can watch and see what everyone else in the challenge got up to. It's easy to get carried away when you're doing a cutting and sticking project, but I wanted to make sure I left quite a lot of my container white, so I had a balance between the roses and the background. But what I did do, if I thought there was too much white, was I went back and overlapped my leaves on the roses and then added little buds from the napkin and layered those on top as well. Because I wanted to take my decoupage up a level, I've decided to use the white part of the napkin that I pulled apart, that first and second ply, and use those to stamp on some wording using some more of my Iron Orchid design stamps. So I'm going to stamp those, ink them up, stamp them onto the tissue paper, let them dry, and then do exactly the same thing as I did for the roses and cut them out and then apply them using my glue. I'm quite new to Iron Orchid designs, but I will say I'm having such fun using their stamps. So there is a huge variety that you can choose from, and all you need to do is, if you search for IOD, Iron Orchid Designs, you should be able to find a retailer quite near you. I've peeled off the stamp that I want to use and I put it onto the plastic backing sheet, and as you've just seen that I ink that up and then flip the stamp over and carefully put it onto my white sheet of tissue paper, which you can't see very well, and then without moving or shifting, just run my fingers along the stamp to make sure it all takes properly. So I've inked once and I've printed twice. I wasn't sure whether I wanted the heavy ink of the first stamp or to use the paler one of the second. And you can see now that I've learnt the trick of using the artist's paintbrush to draw around the decoupage using the water, and this is what sort of dissolves the tissue paper away. So instead of tearing at the paper to cut it out, you'll notice when I do come to pull it apart, you're sort of gently pulling apart the paper because it's started to dissolve. And as you can see, it's much faster than all that careful tearing I was doing right at the beginning of the video. Now that my wording has dried out, I then need to decide where to put it on my container. So again, I'm going to layer up, leave some of the container white and just have this as a little subtle saying. It says La Rose for the roses. So position it first of all just by eye, see whether I like it, and then when I'm ready to go, add on my glue and then stick my wording in place. I then decided to get a bit more ambitious with my decoration and stamped up some of this decorative toile design and also a dragonfly. I was really pleased I went the extra mile with my decorations, and I love the contrast between the blousy romantic roses and the dark text, and of course that really cute little dragonfly. I displayed my finished decoupage container on my kitchen windowsill and filled it with some fresh potted herbs. I think it looks absolutely fantastic, and I was so pleased with the way this turned out. In fact, I was so pleased with this whole technique of mixing the decoupage and the stamping with the IOD stamps together that I then went on to do some stamping on an old lamp base to create a pedestal to display my flower arrangements on. So watch on to the end of the video and I'll show you a picture of that, and I'll also show you how I decoupaged a pillar candle. No glue involved, just a piece of baking sheet and a hairdryer. As promised, here is the lamp base that I've decoupaged and used my stamps on, and there's the candle. I'll show you how I did that in this next clip.
It looks great, doesn't it? Apart from the fact the serviette isn't actually attached to the candle, it's just loosely gripped on there. So having done some research, I'm going to wrap the candle with baking parchment, turn the heat up on my hairdryer, and then really go for it and get this to actually melt in to the candle itself. So by rolling it over with a bit of extra, means I've got something to hold. Then I'm going to direct the heat onto the serviette. And if my hands get too hot, I've got a pair of oven gloves off to the side to stop me getting burnt. So that looks like it has stuck much better. So I can't lift it up like I could before. So I'm going to carry on and work my way over the rest of the serviette. I might put those oven gloves on though. So I reckon that's done. Certainly can't see any air pockets, and as I try and flick the edges in, it does seem to be holding firm, so it hasn't actually melted, it's just bonded to the side of the candle. So I'm going to leave that to cool and see how securely it has fixed once it's cold.
And it did hold really well. That's all for me for now, and I'll see you in the next video.